Another Demis Helen tutorial. We're going to look at some EQ tips, and we're going to start with mixing in context. So mixing in context is, i.e., not just playing a sound like this and then EQing the hell out of it, making it sound exactly how you want, because then it might not fit in context with the track. So the track might need that bit more bass that I've cut off clearly in that bass sound. That little bit of mid-range that I've scooped out could do with being back in the track, but when I listen to it in context, it sounds pretty okay, and that's where I kind of want the sound to sit. So if we look at the EQ here, I've just rolled it off, so it's at the is that 18? Yep, I ain't got my glasses on today. So that is 18 dB per octave, and it's cut off at 81 Hertz. So I don't want pretty much any bass detail in there. So there's the bass detail, and there's the bass detail removed. But secondly, if I solo this, I've got two bass sounds in this track. So if we unsolo the first one, I have this second powerful bass, and this one has more low end, so it's only cut off at 28, and this is to add some oomph back into the bottom and control more of the lower end with the kick. And when you add this second bass in, it's controlling more of the upper mids to the highs to give it a little bit of presence. So let's just listen to them again, and with the other bass. So mixing those two just on their own and then putting them together is not going to work. I'm going to need to mix them both in context. So I'll do some generic kind of rolling off and just placing the sound where I want it to be. And then I'll start looking at everything else. So like this scoop here is scooping out the kick. It's very, very drastic, but it's a very powerful bass. It's still going through the process of being mixed, but that is just to make sure that that area is scooped out for the kick drum to operate. The problem is with this track, the kick drum has gone missing out of the project file, so I'm going to have to build a new one, but that's where the original kick sat. And then I've scooped out some of the kind of the mids there to make the pads and the synth breathe a little bit better. So if we just unsolo them and listen to it in context. And if we drag this one back down here to introduce the bass again, you'll notice the kick starts to get drowned out. So in this case, it doesn't need that low detail in this section. I want it to focus on being more of the rhythm drive. Now we could easily just knock that down and then put a scoop in to make the kick breathe again, but then you're adding that muddiness back in. There's too much bass. I just want one of them to be the control, like controlling the sub area, and then one to kind of control the rhythm part, which is the lower to upper mids. So that's mixing in context. You don't just want to isolate a sound and then edit the hell out of it and then whack it in your mix, because that's never going to work unless you are just creating a piano track all the way through. Then you're going to solo edit because there's nothing else there. So that's the first one. The second one is to generally cut on your EQ. You don't go in there and boost everything. And it kind of leads into the third tip that I do have about boosting. So if we use the bass again, we'll use this really low one. And what we're going to do is put another Pro Q2 on there. And I listen to this sound, so if we just bypass the first one, so we've got that nice, horrible, muddy sound. And I want to go in there and say, right, well, I want it to sound different. I'm not going to go in here and go and boost some areas, because essentially when you're starting out, you want to take away more of the sound, take the bits that you don't want. And to identify the bits you don't want is either kind of doing a frequency sweep, so like here. many. So you can pick out some nasty frequencies, especially the ones that go more resonant. I've done that in many previous videos. Like that area, I would give it a nice... You can do... Generally when you cut in, you do some sharp cuts. So a bit more surgical. That's not the only thing to do. You can do some cuts here, but just generally with a narrow EQ is good for surgical cuts. So you can do really narrow, or you can kind of do a scoop out. You can do a roll off, and you can control how much roll off there is, 96 decibels per octave. So you're really giving it that sharp fall off, or you can give it a really gentle slope. So that leads into the third point. After you want to cut certain sounds out, so you're going to cut that kick area out, you're probably going to cut some of the mids out like I have done on that other EQ there, if we just look at that. So the cuts, there's no boosts in there whatsoever. I've cut out the bits that I don't want. So the third point is when you are having to boost, you need to make sure it's nice and wide. Keep it wide as a rule of thumb, so you're controlling a more smoother curve of the frequency rather than just whacking up a section like that, because you're going to get a weird sound unless you're going to achieve that like with sound effects, or you want to create a bit of a weirder synth sound that fits in the background. I'm not saying for the experimentation part of things you can do that by all means, but when you are generally boosting things, boost the areas with nice long sweeping curves. Don't go for this sharp stuff. Go for nice big curves. So if I narrow that, you're concentrating on that little bit there, and it's more obvious. But if you do that as a nice wider curve, it sounds nicer. Which leads kind of into the fourth point about boosting, is when you have boosted areas. So say I've picked that there and I've picked that there. Let's just get rid of this one, and we'll get rid of this one. When you've boosted, control it with your output gain. Keep an eye on here. As you can see, it's not reaching up at the top, but if I did this, I end up in territory where I'm clipping. So keep an eye on that, and use your output level to just kind of control the volume going back out to keep your headroom in the mix. But more importantly is once you have boosted, we're going to do a kind of A to B, so flipping from A to B here. So which is going to check, have you boosted it and it's just boosted the volume and it sounds louder, because that's not always the thing that you want to achieve with EQ. You want to sculpt and shape your sound. You don't just want to boost the EQ and make it louder, because essentially this is gain. You are increasing the volume of that frequency area. So if you're just boosting everywhere and then you put it into your mix, just turn it off, turn it back on, turn it off, turn it back on. Is it just getting louder? Because if it is, then you need to kind of scrap it and start again. And that's why you have this A/B feature as well. You can switch between different presets, but you can also kind of experiment with just switching it on and off, on and off. Is it just louder, or does it sound different? So close your eyes if that works, or look down and just sculpt it that way. So if you've made a sound and then just close your eyes, switch it off. So if you're boosting the volume, that's kind of boosting the volume, but it's boosting the highs. Has it made it sound better, or has it just made it sound louder? And in that case, that's just louder. And you can tell by your output here as well. So that's probably one of the best ways. Close the eyes and then listen to it on and off, on and off. Does it sound better? Does it sound louder? Or does it just sound sculpted nicely? So, like, for example, sculpted nicely. That sounds different rather than just louder. So it's depending on the track you're making and how you want it to sound, that particular sound. And don't forget to mix it in context, back to point 1. And then finally, if you have an EQ and you're desperately trying to get that sound to fit into your mix, there's something drastically wrong. If you are trying to make it fit as best as you can, you've got the wrong sound, or you've approached the EQ the wrong way. So the best thing to do is, if you get into that sticky mess where you've approached it and then the second day you approach it again and it's still not working, scrap it, get rid of it. So like this, I'll just go in there and I'll go, right, okay, I'll keep it. I want to see what I did before. So I did it last night, had a few drinks, and it sounded amazing, but this morning it sounds really bad, which happens a lot. You switch it to B and just start making your edits again, and then switch between them, so you can see how bad it sounded before and how you've EQ'd it this time round. And you'll go, yep, that definitely sounds better. And then on the A copy you can clear it, so you don't have to go back to that sound. Or you can just totally delete the VST from the inserts and start again. Sometimes, like FabFilter there, it's not always the right EQ to use for the situation. So I might go in there and think, right, I'm going to use FatMaker and I'm going to use some of this style EQ and generate a different sound, because they're all emulated from different bits of hardware and different ideas. So FabFilter is more surgical, I would say. Has a great visual, and I use it in my videos all the time because it's easy to demonstrate using everything that is built into this, from the piano roll to the physical look of the curves, to be able to select everything and move things about and invert them. It's better to teach, but EQs are not always just use FabFilter, it's amazing, that's the only one you need. You need to find the ones that make your sound amazing. So that's where we're going to leave that. That's some EQ tips. I think I covered 5 there. If you want some more, we can go through some more. I might even just start looking through some forums and pulling out some ones from industry leading kind of engineers that give out tips. But usually it's cutting, not boosting, and if it doesn't fit, start again and mix in context. If you don't do those things, you're going to find that you're really trying too hard to piece things together. Definitely. So like this track, where are we? If I try to mix those two sounds with loads of bass and then add the bass back in, it's going to sound horrendous, because these are going to have these really big resonant frequencies. If you're controlling them and you're building it that way and making the bass from there, then you won't need too much bass from the bass up here. But you know what I mean. You don't just cut bass out of everything and just have bass in bass. You've got to keep that warmth. In this particular case, I want these pads to sound icy cold. Usually you'd add a bit of warmth and a bit of humanization back into it by keeping that lower end. For example, a piano, you're not just going to cut the bass out because you need to feel that power of it, but you don't need all of it. There's all different ways to approach things, but that is just some generic tips to get you started and understanding EQ in a bit of a better way, I hope. I'll do some more videos like this, maybe delve into some more compression tips, maybe some EQ tips in the future. So anyway, thank you for watching. I'm rambling on. See you in the next video.